Hey everyone, it's Glenn Greenwald, and I'm back with a new episode of System Update exclusively on Rumble. And I want to examine what is just the latest, but perhaps most deranged and humiliating fraud yet that the CIA, in conjunction with their standard partners in the corporate media, just got caught perpetrating on the American public. There are an endless number of stories just that I've covered in the last 7 weeks since I've been on Rumble, where the intelligence community worked with the same set of so-called journalists at NBC and the New York Times and in the Russiagate sector of the digital media to perpetrate one fraud after the next that is now being proven to be false. I've covered the indictment of Hillary Clinton's lawyer that demonstrated that the story about Trump and his organization having a secret server with a Russian-based bank, Alpha Bank, was a complete fraud. We have covered the fact that the story last year from the New York Times that came from the CIA, that Russia had placed bounties on the heads of American soldiers, which was laundered by the New York Times and used by pro-war Democrats and Liz Cheney to block President Trump's withdrawal plan from Afghanistan, was also a fraud. And of course, we've also recently discovered yet again from a new book by a political reporter that the emails in the Hunter Biden archive are completely authentic and genuine and not Russian disinformation, as intelligence agencies and agents working with their partners in the corporate media have been claiming for the last year in order to censor that story and discredit it. So it's just one lie after the next by the same set of power factions in the intelligence community and the media, often centered on Russia, that are complete fabrications, frauds, disinformation designed to advance their agenda. And the latest one that we have is one that has been clearly false for some time, that we just have obtained new definitive evidence about how blatantly they lied. But it's the most absurd story yet. You may remember that in 2017, 2018, 2019, the corporate media, in conjunction with the CIA, began claiming that Russia had invented some completely new, futuristic, highly sophisticated sonic weapon that no one in the West had ever heard of or invented or even knew anything about, and they were using this dastardly weapon to emit sonic sounds that were causing brain damage in American diplomats and other American government agents, first in Havana, which was why it was called the Havana syndrome, also in China, in Iran, in places in Western Europe, including Austria. And the fact that this was Russia that was behind this plot, and that President Trump therefore was too afraid to do anything about it because he didn't want to offend Putin, became just one of the science fictions, the fairy tales that the media fed us over and over and over. Let's just remind ourselves about how preposterous was their behavior as they peddled this complete lie. Here is a segment from MSNBC, from NBC News on September 11th of 2018. You'll just listen to what it is that they say.
Exclusive new reporting this morning from NBC News. Intelligence agencies investigating attacks on U.S. diplomats in Cuba and China now strongly suspect that Russia is to blame. 26 government workers in Havana had mysterious brain injuries starting in late 2016. And then this year, one U.S. worker in China was diagnosed with similar symptoms. Joining me now with more on this is NBC News intelligence and national security reporter Ken Delaney. And so this has been a mystery. The CIA, the FBI, other intelligence agencies have all been working to try to figure out what exactly happened here. Why do they suspect Russia now, and what's the evidence that they have?
Well, it's still partially a mystery, Chris, but they have more and more evidence, they say, 3 U.S. officials tell us, pointing to Russia, including communications intercepts that suggest that the Russian intelligence agency was involved. Now,
breaking news, Russia is to blame. And you see that what they do, they just launder what intelligence officials feed to them uncritically over and over and over again without an ounce of skepticism. And it's always the same people. There you have Ken Delaney, who I did reporting with colleagues at The Intercept back in 2014, where we FOIA'd the CIA and the State Department for communications with reporters and found that he would actually submit his drafts, his stories to the CIA for review prior to publishing them. That's how loyal of a servant he is to the CIA. He was one of the leading fabricators behind numerous Russiagate stories. And there he is right at the center of this fake story as well. Here was what NBC News and Andrea Mitchell did that night on their network broadcast.
The mystery: who or what caused American officials living in these Havana homes and several hotels to suffer headaches, dizziness, and some serious brain injuries similar to a concussion. Last year, Cuban investigators told us they would never allow their territory to be used that way. But now Russia is the leading suspect, NBC News has learned, according to 3 U.S. officials and 2 others briefed on the investigation. Evidence, they say, backed up by highly secret communications intercepts collected during a lengthy and ongoing investigation involving the FBI, CIA, and other agencies. U.S. officials also tell NBC News investigators now believe the Americans were deliberately targeted.
This is just pure propaganda by NBC News. They just put graphics on the screen. They're told what to say. By the CIA, they say they're deliberately targeted. Russia is the leading suspect over and over and over. Now, again, I said earlier that it's always the same people. Here is one of the leading Russiagate fabulists, Natasha Bertrand, who began at Business Insider, where she pushed that fake Trump Alpha Bank story, got promoted to Politico, then to The Atlantic, then to now to CNN, where she was one of the leading proponents of the fraudulent Steele dossier. She's virtually at the center of every fake Russiagate lie and Russiagate story that we've been subjected to for the last 5 years. Here she is on Twitter as late as October 2020, promoting this story. Must read from GQ's Julia Yaffe, another Russiagate fanatic, that also confirms what we reported last month, that CIA Director Gina Haspel completely dismissed analysts who brought her intel showing Russia might be behind the microwave attacks known as Havana syndrome. And what she's really saying there is that Gina Haspel did something wrong by discounting the fairy tale that they had all created, namely that Russia was behind this dastardly attack. Let's take a look at what Julia Yaffe wrote in the GQ article that Natasha Bertrand told everyone was a must read. Here you see the headline, "The Mystery of the Immaculate Concussion." And you see an American diplomat or someone with lightning bolts going into his brain, and it's falling on the ground, and very dramatic. And the story is very familiar to anyone who followed the Russiagate fraud. She begins by referencing the CIA official who's at the center of the story, Paulus, who is in every one of these articles. She says, as he grasped for an explanation, he was paying careful attention to what was being discovered about the incidents in Cuba and China. By the summer of 2018, scientists, intelligence officials, and journalists were zeroing in on a potential culprit: microwave weapons. Sitting in his office in Langley, Paulus was convinced he knew who was behind these attacks, these apparent attacks: Moscow. He had been charged with pushing back against the Russians, and now he figured the Russians were retaliating, including against him personally. He created this paranoid delusion in his brain, laundered by these Russiagate journalists, that Russia was so angry that he had come too close to the truth that they invented this secret weapon that no one in the West heard of to injure his brain using microwave sonic attacks on his neurons. She goes on December 23rd, 2019, the CIA team investigating the attacks brought its findings to CIA Director Gina Haspel, according to 2 sources. After listening to the investigators lay out their evidence that suggested the Russian security services were behind the hits on agency personnel, Haspel challenged them. They say she accused the investigators of both hiding information from her and lying to her about what their inquiry uncovered. She was skeptical of their attempt to frame Russia. The story goes on. The sources say that the director questioned the motives of those looking into the mysterious attacks. Quote, "This is why we need to clean out Russia House," she said, referring to the CIA's operation unit focused on Russia, according to 2 sources. "You're just trying to stir up trouble on Russia." A third source confirmed that, quote, "the meeting did not go well." Now, in case you're wondering which side Julia Yaffe and Natasha Bertrand decided to take, it was the same side as NBC News, in favor of the idea that Russia had developed this dastardly weapon that Gina Haspel was trying to cover up. The article says, but the other explanation for dismissing the conclusions of the investigating team is more troubling. According to reporting in Politico, Haspel has seemed to be reluctant with what information on Russia she brings to the White House, given President Trump's obstinate lack of willingness to condemn Vladimir Putin or Russian attacks in any way. No one's going to brief anything on Russia to the president, Paulin Maripopoulos told me. They're terrified of doing that. I know from the briefers, because he'll explode and the whole thing will get derailed because he has this weird affinity for Putin. The article concludes, asked why Putin remains such an untouchable subject for the American president, the former national security official said, quote, he doesn't want to be embarrassed in front of Putin. That's part of the dilemma. He wants Putin to like him. Just look at how he behaves with the Queen. That's how he behaves with everyone who has any glamour and cachet. Moreover, the former official added, Putin has everything he doesn't have. So do you see what they did there? They concocted this wild, deranged, demented conspiracy theory that the Russians had invented this new secret weapon and was attacking American CIA officials and diplomats through some method that scientists in the CIA and the surveillance agencies with their tentacles in every country had no idea what they had done. But the only reason they were covering it up was because Trump doesn't want any negative information about Vladimir Putin, and therefore the director of the CIA, Gina Haspel, was pretending to be skeptical about these claims, not because there was no evidence for it, not because she could see that it was just their hysteria and their manipulation of the public causing it, but instead because she didn't want to bring negative information to Donald Trump because she knew that Trump never wanted to hear anything negative about Russia. Now, as I said, we've got new evidence that this whole story is a fraud. But just as was true in the Hunter Biden case, where we got new evidence that those emails were authentic, but in reality, we knew all along from the very start that they were authentic, even when the media was saying this was Russian disinformation. We've known for years that this story was a joke, was a complete fraud. Here is an article I wrote in the beginning of 2019, in which I wrote under the headline, NBC and MSNBC blamed Russia for using, quote, sophisticated microwaves to cause brain injuries in U.S. diplomats in Cuba. The culprits were likely crickets. Crickets were actually the origin of these sonic weapons that people in the CIA were telling NBC and Julia Yaffe and Natasha Bertrand to blame on the Russians. Now, what happened was really interesting. AP announced in 2017 that it had gotten a hold of audio tape of what these bizarre sounds were that American diplomats and CIA operatives in Havana were claiming were causing their brain injury. This mysterious sound that no one could recognize and therefore must be some dastardly new weapon. The article was headlined, Dangerous Sound, What Americans Heard in Cuba Attacks. And the article says the Associated Press has obtained a recording of what some U.S. embassy workers heard in Havana in a series of unnerving incidents, later deemed to be deliberate attacks. The recording, released Thursday by the AP, is the first disseminated publicly of the many taken in Cuba of mysterious sounds that led investigators initially to suspect a sonic weapon. And AP published audio, a short audio, of the sound that all of these people in the CIA and the State Department who were convinced they had been attacked by a secret weapon were hearing. And this is what the sound sounds like. Now, that sound doesn't actually sound that bizarre to me, or that exotic, or that otherworldly. It sounds like a cricket or an insect or some other exotic bug that emits sounds. And in fact, that's exactly when scientists went and analyzed this audio file, they concluded definitively, adamantly, that it was not some secret microwave weapon invented by the Russians, but just a cricket that is common in Cuba. So here you see the New York Times article in January of 2019 that reads, the sounds that haunted U.S. diplomats in Cuba, lovelorn crickets, scientists say. Diplomatic officials may have been targeted with an unknown weapon in Havana But according to one but a recording of one, quote, sonic attack actually is the singing of a very loud cricket, a new analysis conclude. It's the sound that crickets make when they're trying to attract mates to have mating season. So the New York Times article quotes this scientist, Alexander Stubbs of the University of California, Berkeley, and Fernando Montalegre of the University of Lincoln in England. They studied a recording of the sounds made by diplomats and published by the AP. Quote, there's plenty of debate in the medical community over what, if any, physical damage there is to these individuals, said Mr. Stubbs in a phone interview. All I can say definitively, fairly definitively, is that the AP released recording is of a cricket, and we think we know what species it is. So all of this hullabaloo about a secret weapon unleashed by the Russians using microwave waves to attack Americans was all along just the sound that crickets in Cuba make, and these scientists could actually identify it. Here's the paper they published, the New York Times and I reported on, from the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory Report, January 4th, 2019. The headline is, recording of, quote, sonic attacks on U.S. diplomats in Cuba spectrally matches the echoing call of a Caribbean cricket. And here is the dastardly villain that was emitting these sounds. There it is. It's an Indies short-tailed cricket. There's the photo that is in all kinds of encyclopedias used by scientists to study different animal species. And it was definitive, according to this report, that the AP recording was nothing but this thing emitting sounds to attract a mate. The report says, quote, while the temporal pulse structure in the recording of the cricket call is unlike any natural insect source, when the cricket call is played on a loudspeaker and recorded indoors, the interaction of reflected sound pulses yields a sound virtually indistinguishable from the AP sample. This provides strong evidence that an echoing cricket call, rather than a sonic attack or other technological device, is responsible for the sound in the released recording. It goes on, although the causes of the health problems reported by the embassy personnel are beyond the scope of this paper, so they're not saying whether or not people really got sick, our findings highlight the need for more rigorous research into the source of these ailments, including the potential psychogenic effects, as well as possible physiological explanations unrelated to sonic attacks. So they're essentially saying that one serious possibility is that the reason these people were getting sick was because they were all hearing about the potential for this secret, highly menacing sonic weapon and were creating psychosomatic symptoms, psychogenic effects. They were imagining that they were sick when, in fact, they really weren't. Now, in September, just about a month ago or so, we got still more evidence that this whole thing was a fraud. BuzzFeed reported that a declassified State Department report says microwaves did not cause the Havana syndrome. This is what the declassified report from the State Department in November 2018 said. Quote, no plausible single source of energy, neither radio, microwaves, nor sonic, can produce both the recorded audio video signals and the recorded medical effects. We believe the recorded sounds are mechanical or biological in origin rather than electronic. The most likely source, this is the State Department, is the Indies short-tailed cricket. There's the Latin term for it. The call of this animal matches in nuanced detail the spectral properties of the recordings from Cuba once room echoes are taken into account. BuzzFeed then says the scientists also noted that while the suffering reported by the affected individuals is real, mass psychology can also trigger neurological injuries in people. The JASON, which is the committee of scientists convened by the State Department, believes such psychogenic effects may serve to explain important components of the reported injuries. In other words, they just were the victims of mass hysteria created by these lies invented by their own agency, and they became convinced they were getting sick whenever they would hear the sounds of these crickets that NBC News and Natasha Bertrand and Julia Ioffe and the entire crew of liars and propagandists were claiming was some new secret clandestine sonic microwave weapon invented by the Russians. Now, just to give you further indication for how deranged and unhinged the media discourse was, look at what happened on Morning Joe in May of this year, just 3 or 4 months ago, Listen to them talk about this.
One of the reasons we asked you on today is because I've got a good friend, lifelong friend who's in the agency, who has a friend who went to an official trip to Moscow, who had to retire because he got attacked as well. But you say here in this one incident, later geolocation data indicated that vehicles affiliated with Russia's military intelligence service had been in the vicinity of both people at the time of their separate incidences. Is that perhaps one of the only pieces of evidence that they have that Russia may be directly connected with this?
Now, again, I said it's always the same people. Here you have Joe Scarborough, who, of course, was one of the leading Russiagate fanatics. One time I criticized him, and he responded by saying, I'm sure your criticism sounded better in the original Russian, comrade. That's just the mentality of these people. They see Russia lurking everywhere. Another person who inserted himself, unsurprisingly, into all of this fraud was one of the worst liars in all of Congress, if not the single worst one, Congressman Adam Schiff, the Democrat from California, who spent 4 years claiming that he has seen definitive proof, smoking gun evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, only for the Mueller investigation to conclude by saying there was no evidence to establish it. He was at the center of this as well. Here's an article from September 21st of this year, so 2 weeks ago, from the New York Times. The House passes a bill to provide care for U.S. officials suffering from Havana syndrome. The article says, U.S. diplomats and CIA officers have been injured in China, Central Asian countries, and Europe, including Vienna. At least 2 possible episodes in the United States are being investigated, but officials are even more unsure about the circumstances. Quote, the number is going up all the time, said Representative Adam B. Schiff, Democrat of California, and the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee in an interview this summer. Some officials have pointed to Russia as the most likely culprit, which Moscow has repeatedly denied. Other officials believe multiple adversaries could be responsible. Quote, from the descriptions that I've heard firsthand from some of the victims, they seem quite purposeful, quite deliberate, and very specific, Mr. Schiff said, and that's suggestive of a foreign bad actor. From the descriptions that I've heard, so Adam Schiff then went on to Twitter in May of 2021, he said, American personnel around the world have reported concerning health incidents, sometimes called, quote, Havana syndrome. One bipartisan bill will ensure they get the resources needed to recover. We will get to the bottom of these incidents, and we will protect and support our people. Here's another tweet from September, just about 2 weeks ago. There is no higher priority than protecting our people. None. As we examine the cause of the illness known as Havana syndrome, we must ensure that those impacted get the care they deserve. My Havana Act will do just that, and it's on its way to President Biden's desk for signature. Now, this insanity about Russia being behind all this continued throughout the media all the way into this year. Here's a Political article from May 2021. Quote, Russian spy unit suspected of directed energy attacks on U.S. personnel. CIA Director William Burns is now receiving daily briefings on the investigation. That's how serious these crickets are. I mean, these microwave weapons are, that the CIA director is now getting daily briefings because a spy agency in Russia is suspected of these directed energy attacks. Here's Politico, quote, it looks, smells, and feels like the GRU, Russia's military intelligence unit, said one former national security official involved in the investigation. Quote, when you're looking at the landscape, there are very few people who are willing, capable, and have the technology. It's pretty simple forensics. Just like they said the Russians were putting bounties on the heads of American soldiers, just like they said the Russians had created a secret channel to communicate with the Trump campaign and Alpha Bank, just like they said that the Hunter Biden emails had all the classic hallmarks, in the word of James Clapper, of Soviet-Russian tradecraft. They're just saying it looks, smells, and feels like Russia did this. Now, according to NBC News, the State Department and the FBI are now telling the CIA that they think these people are crazy, essentially, that they are imagining this. Here is from NBC, intense meeting with Secretary of State Blinken. The Havana syndrome diplomats complain of skepticism. These people who believe they've been injured by these weapons the media has been talking about for 3 years are angry that now there's skepticism. Exclusive, in his first meeting with the cohort of State Department staffers affected in Cuba and China, the Secretary of State spent more than an hour offering reassurances and fielding questions. It says, but the FBI, which traveled multiple times to Havana to investigate, later issued a report that found no evidence of an attack and determined the staffers were most likely suffering from mass psychogenic illness, otherwise known as mass hysteria. That is what has propelled this from the start. These people are hysterical because the CIA and the media outlets that they believe have told them for so long that there's this secret weapon out there that is injuring their brain. The NBC News article goes on to say diplomats told NBC News that they were dismayed that Ambassador Pamela Spratlin, tapped by the Biden administration to oversee the State Department's response, declined to conclusively rule out the mass hysteria theory. Several individuals affected by Havana syndrome in Cuba or China said the State Department's Bureau of Medical Services originally told them their symptoms were due to stress or attributed their cognitive symptoms to simply getting older. Think about how dangerous this is. Russia is the second largest nuclear power on the planet. These same people in the media outlets, the same ones over and over, getting fed lies by the CIA, have spent 5 years trying to scare the American public into believing that Russia is attacking the United States in all sorts of ways. They've infiltrated our country. They had blackmail power over President Trump. They were controlling the levers of power in the United States. They had developed this secret futuristic weapon beyond the ken of knowledge or understanding of all of our most brilliant scientists, who were able to do it in such secrecy that even our surveillance agencies couldn't detect. And somehow they were able to move this around the world to all these different places: Central Asia, Havana, China, Iran, Austria, all right under the noses of American and Western intelligence officials, never once being detected, injuring all these people with these directed waves. This is stuff that Hollywood would reject as preposterous. And yet our Russiagate sector of the media, NBC, the New York Times, all of these people, Politico, laundered it over and over. Do you see what liars these people are? This is why it is so disturbing to hear these media outlets demand the power to censor the internet in the name of stopping disinformation, when what we see over and over is the same lesson. The most aggressive, the most frequent, the most toxic purveyors of disinformation are not Trump boomers on Facebook and QAnon sites or teenagers on 4chan. They're the exact corporate media outlets, in conjunction with their partners in the intelligence community, who are spreading the most disinformation in the most harmful way possible.